Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much to the Shul, Rishus, Rav Shlomo. Thank you to everybody for coming out to commemorate this year's Yom Hashoah. Obviously something near and dear to my heart that I feel is very, very important to do. So I appreciate us all being here together. When we put all of our hearts together, it makes light out of this darkness. So last year we spoke about Treblinka, and this year I thought, as we were speaking about Treblinka last year, that actually most people have never heard of Belzec. Most people don't know what Belzec is. Most people don't know that it's the third largest killing site of Jews in the Holocaust. Most people don't know anything about it because really there were only 2 survivors out of 500,000 Jews who were murdered in Belzec. Only 2 were able to tell their testimony, give their testimony after the war. And that's really the whole reason why most people don't know anything about it. So I felt like it was my duty to share the story of Belzec and to remember some of the souls that perished there, some of the communities that perished there. Okay, so we'll start with a quote from the Belzec Rebbe. The Belzec Rebbe's family were killed in Belzec, and he said, after the war, every day, every child, after studying the daily lessons prescribed by our sages, should learn about the Holocaust. For it says in our holy Torah, "Then it shall come to pass, when many evils and troubles are come upon them, that this song shall testify before them as a witness." Devarim. The suffering and the testimonies, when told by Holocaust survivors, are a song, a hymn of praise, a testimony to the eternity of the Jewish people and the greatness of their spirit. Rav Yisrael Spira, the Belzec Rebbe. So there are fewer and fewer survivors that can tell their story. And as much as I would love to bring a survivor here to share their story with us, it's very, very challenging for them. So one of the things that Eli Wiesel really gave over to us is that each one of us can be a witness. And with the Belzec Rebbe's blessing, we will tell the story. I'm also sharing tonight a story of actually a close family friend. His name was Sam Halpern, and I grew up knowing him. He passed away in 2013, but he was a friend of my Zadie's, and I knew him for a very, very long time. And his family were also killed in Belzec. And he said, in the concentration camp, even as people were selected for death, they would say to me, "If you get out, tell the story." I know that one of the main reasons I survived was to relate what happened to the Jewish people in Europe during the Second World War. By describing what I and my loved ones endured, by recalling the ghettos, actions, labor and concentration camps, I am fulfilling the promise I made to those who cannot speak for themselves. And that's what we're doing here tonight, once again. But it wouldn't be me and it wouldn't be Shirat David if we also didn't share some Chassidus, or at least a story. And Sam, whose book is on the table. Actually, let me just explain what we're going to do tonight. So as in previous years, can I take this off? Yeah. Thanks. As in previous years, I've made candles, and you can all actually do this. Last year we spoke about the pages of testimony, right? The pages of testimony are pages that a family member or really anyone who knows someone who was killed in the Shoah, someone who was murdered in the Shoah, you can fill out a page of testimony that will then keep their name alive, keep their memory alive. And all of the pages of testimony are linked to a website that makes the labels that some of your kids came home with today, right, on candles. And you can actually make a label for your own family member, and you can light a candle with their name on it. So I have in the back, there's a table, just a handful of candles this year, of people who were killed, who were murdered in Belzec. And on the table, I have the 6 people the 6 families that I'm specifically going to talk about. So throughout the evening, I'll ask people to come up and light the candle for the person that we've spoken about. Okay, so Sam's book actually starts with a famous story that you've probably all heard, which is that there was once a terrible decree against the Jewish people, and the Baal Shem Tov took his student, the Maggid of Mezrich, to a special secret place in the forest. And he lit a fire using just 2 branches that he put together. And as he lit the fire, the Maggid of Mezrich noticed that the branches were not being consumed, like the burning bush. And the Baal Shem Tov closed his eyes, and he went into a deep place of kavana. And from that deep place of kavana, he davened. And when he opened his eyes, he smiled at the Maggid of Mezrich, and he said, "The decree has been annulled." And they left. In the next generation, when the Maggid was the leader of the Hasidim, there was once again a terrible decree on the Jewish people. And this time the Maggid took Reb Moshe Leib Sasov, and they went to that same place in the forest. But the Maggid couldn't light the fire the way that the Baal Shem Tov lit the fire. So he told Reb Moshe Leib Sasov about it, and then he closed his eyes, and he went into a deep place of kavana, and he davened. And when he opened his eyes, he smiled at Reb Moshe Leib, and he said, "The decree has been annulled." In the next generation, there was another decree, and Reb Moshe Leib Sasov, he knew the place in the forest, but as much as he tried to focus on what the Maggid had said in the tefillah that he said, Reb Moshe Leib Sasov didn't know the tefillah. So he went to the forest and he davened his own tefillah, and the decree was annulled. In the next generation, Reb Yisrael of Ruzhin, he said, "There's now a decree against the Jewish people, but I don't know that place in the forest, and I can't light the fire the way the Baal Shem Tov lit the fire, and I don't know the tefillah, but I know the story, and that will have to be enough." And it was. We know the story. We don't know all the details. We don't know all the names, but we'll tell the story that we have. Okay, this is just like I don't know if you can see this. Can you see it? Yeah? Okay, so it's just like a roundup of what the numbers of Belzec are, okay? It was built in a very convenient place between Lublin and Lvov. I have a map that I'll show you in a minute. And it's built in November of 1941, but it starts functioning in March of 1942. It's pretty small, 270 meters by 270 meters. It was guarded by about 20 to 30 SS members and 120 Ukrainian travniki, right? These are Ukrainians who were captured by the Germans and given the option to join the German side. And the main killing period, the killing period, is between March 1942 and December 1942. 80,000 Jews were killed in the first 4 weeks. So from March to April of 1942, already 80,000 Jews were killed, murdered. And in total, we don't know the exact numbers. In truth, even though I work actually very closely with the people at the Belzec Museum, their numbers seem to go down each year. Not sure exactly what's happening there, but we know that at least 500,000 Jews were murdered there. In some of the things that you'll be seeing tonight, it actually uses the number 600,000. The truth is we don't we just don't know. And there were shooting pits also, and the population that would have been sent to Belzec were also subject possibly to the shooting pits. It's that same population, and so we just don't have an exact number, but we'll use the number of about 500,000. And then it stops. December 1942, there's no more killing. The camp is essentially being dismantled. Bodies which were buried in mass graves are being exhumed and burned, and then that's it. By May, June of 1943, the whole camp has been destroyed, literally leveled to the ground, and trees planted on it to make it look like nothing ever happened there. In fact, one of the Ukrainian travniki was given the piece of land to farm on. So it looked like, it was just a farm that someone was living on afterwards. And it took a very, very long time for word to get out, for whatever stories we have to actually get out. Okay, so I'll show you where it was, okay? Essentially, Belzec is in the area exactly on the border of what the dividing line was between the German territory and the Soviet territory between 1939 and 1941. Okay, so you can see Lublin there and Lvov there, and Belzec was right in the middle of them. Okay, Lvov ends up being on the Soviet side. A lot of the Jews that were sent to Belzec ultimately were on the Soviet side for the first 2 years of the war. And then when the Germans invaded, Belzec was still functioning, or was only beginning to function, and some of them were sent to Belzec. Belzec actually began not as a death camp. It was a series of labor camps because it was on the border with the Soviets. So the Germans wanted to make sure that they would protect the border, and so anti-tank trenches were dug in that area. Belzec is a village, so by the village of Belzec there were these anti-tank trenches that were dug, and of course you can see who's digging them. Okay, there's even a caption on the picture. Okay, Machane Belzec, 1940, Bizman habniya Hamachane haya rak machane hezger. Okay, it was just for digging trenches, not a death camp yet. So here's where it ends up being. Okay, I just want you to start noticing the names of the places. Okay, you can see that the space that we're talking about is totally different than what we were talking about last year. Treblinka's up here. So the population that was sent to Treblinka is basically from Warsaw, Radom, this area, also from Western Europe. Okay, Belzec is all the way over here, so it's going to get more people from this whole area, which is known as Galicia. Okay, just a little bit of history. The partitions of Poland. Okay, Poland was an independent kingdom until 1772. From 1772, you can see it's being taken apart by Prussia, Austria, and Russia. Okay, I don't know if you can see the colors here, but basically the yellow is territory that was taken by Russia, so you can see Russia takes more and more as the years go by. Green is Austria, and orange is Prussia, which is ultimately Germany. Okay, and that's an easier map to see. So you can see Poland ceases to exist by 1795. There literally is no longer a country or a kingdom called Poland, but the Jews that are there actually still consider themselves Polish. The people who are there still consider themselves Polish, but they are going to start having different cultures come in and different rules and different laws. And the area that we're talking about, that we are going to be talking about today, is over here, because that is Galicia. Okay, so you can see this section here. It covers part of what we now call Ukraine and part of what we now call Poland, and even some of what we would call Romania or Hungary at different times. Okay, Galicia. And that's just a nice AI map of it. But I liked it because I want you to see the names of the towns. Okay, very, very important. And I'm going to show you the next map, and you'll understand why I say that. Okay. You're talking about the major centers of Hasidus in Poland. For the most part, Belzec is where all of those Hasidim were killed. Okay, Galicia is the most densely Jewish area of Poland. So to build Belzec exactly where it was, it's on a rail line, it's so-called convenient for the Nazis to send people there, but where it was because of the densely populated Jewish areas. Okay. One more map, and then we'll move on. Okay, these are, again, deportations to Belzec. Okay, I just want to read, I don't know if you guys can read some of the names, we'll see. Brody, Chortkov, Belz, Babov, Lvov, Drolvitz, Stanislavov, Premishil, Zhezhov, or Raisha, Tarnov, Tarnopol, Brody, Zamość. Okay, these are all big, big centers of amazing Jewish life that disappears. The next picture is a painting. Okay, it's made by a person whose name I totally cannot pronounce. Václav, you see it up there, Kolodziejczyk. He was a Pole who lived near Belzec, lived in the town of Belzec. He never stepped foot in the death camp. So why am I bringing this painting? Because it's very obvious that the surrounding... Belzec wasn't like some of the other camps, okay? When we go to Treblinka, we see that it's very far into the woods. It's way past the line, the actual station of like the village of Treblinka. The death camp of Belzec is not. It's right next to the train station. It's literally a couple of 100 meters away from the train station, and the people in the village are very nearby. It's absolutely impossible that they didn't know what was happening. If you thought that there was a chance that they did, okay? And this Polish man made a painting of. That's not to say that every single one of them was whatever. We're not going to go into that area. Okay, there are people that helped. There are definitely people that did not help, and there are very many people who tried to benefit from the camp being there. But this painting is definitely wrong. The camp didn't look anything like this, but it lived on in the imaginations of the people of the village of Belzec. Okay, the painting was made not long after the war. And there's a second painting, which is actually really why I'm showing you the first one, because the second one it's a bit of a harsh painting. That's what Belzec was for really almost half of its existence. The killing again took place from March through December, and then from December through May or June, it was exhuming bodies and burning them. So. Again, this was a full sensory experience for anybody that lived in the near towns, in the near village. Okay, I wanted to bring this map. It's a very basic map, but I just want to show you that all of these squares, all the squares that have numbers all around up here, okay, 33 of them are mass graves. So again, the system was just like the system at every other one of these camps, right? There's 3 camps that operate the same way. Belzec is actually the first one that's built. Belzec is the testing grounds. And then Sobibor is built, and then Treblinka is built. Treblinka was the last one. Treblinka was the one where they fixed all the mistakes that they made in Belzec and Sobibor. So it starts being built in, like I said, November of 1941. And first they brought in Poles to build it, and then they took the Poles away and they brought in Jews to finish building it. And actually the first gassing experiments were done on the Jews that had been brought in to work on the camp, to help build the camp. And so Belzec is the first camp that's built using gas chambers. Okay, meaning Chelmno, there's some seats in here. You guys can come in. Chelmno was built with using gas vans. Gas vans are mobile killing units, okay, mobile killing vehicles, and then Belzec. Okay, so it's the start of something new, unfortunately, where gas chambers are built. There were experiments with Zyklon B, which ultimately gets used in Majdanek and Auschwitz, but not so much in Belzec. It was actually easier for them to use engines, either Soviet tank engines or another large vehicle, an engine. And when we asked why, I asked the museum, the person that's running the museum at Belzec today, and she said that the paperwork shows that they didn't want to have to wait for transports of Zyklon B. The engines were available, they were there, it was easier, and so they just used the engines. Zyklon B would depend on the railway system to get it from the manufacturer to the camp. So they were using essentially what was more available to them. And just like in every other camp, okay, here's the rail spur, okay, this is the main rail line. This is the spur that comes into the camp, okay, really very, very close. They're mamish right next to each other, okay? There's a platform just like in every other camp, and people get taken off the train and selected. Now, 99.9% of the people that come off of the train are gonna go straight to this area. They're gonna have to get undressed, and then they're gonna go straight through this, what's called the tube, to the gas chambers, and they're going to be killed. Okay, the whole thing takes between 1 and 2 hours. It's nothing. Okay, 20 cars at a time. Generally speaking, the trains were either 50 or 60 cars. About 20 could fit onto this rail spur at a time. So at 20 cars times either 80 or 100 people per carriage, it takes like 2 hours to process, meaning murder all of those people. A very, very small number are taken to sort through clothing and to also do the job that is the worst job in the world, the Sonderkommando, who are taking the bodies out of the gas chambers and either putting them in the mass graves or later on when the policy changes, when the method changes, burning them. That's how Sobibor works, that's how Treblinka works, and that's how Belzec works, right? We call them death camps. I think I said this last year, I say it whenever I'm guiding in these places also. We call them death camps. It's not a camp, it's a slaughterhouse. Okay, a train comes in and everyone is murdered. There's not a chance to survive. The only reason that there are survivors from Sobibor and Treblinka is because in those two places there were revolts. And there's a handful of survivors, about 50 or so from each one of those places. And there's no revolt in Belzec. Okay, I'm gonna read a testimony. Now this is actually a testimony from the one survivor that actually lived through the war and the aftermath of the war and gave his testimony, and it's this book right here. Okay, his name is Rudolf Redder. I'll tell you more about him in a little bit, but I wanted to read just his words, okay? Because we always try to use the words of the people who actually were there. As soon as the victims were unloaded, they were assembled in the yard, surrounded by armed Ukrainians. And here, Fritz Ehrman gave a speech. There was a deathly silence. He stood close to the crowd. Everyone wanted to hear. Hope dawned suddenly in us. If they're speaking to us, perhaps we're going to live. Perhaps there will be some sort of work after all. Ehrman spoke very loudly and distinctly. Now you are going for a bath, and afterwards you will be sent to work. That was all. Everybody cheered up and was happy. They applauded. I remember his words repeated day in and day out, usually 3 times a day, repeated for the 4 months that I was there. It was a moment of hope and delusion. For an instant, the people breathed easy. There was total calm. The whole crowd moved on in silence. The men straight through the yard to the building on which was written in large letters, baths and inhalation room. The women went some 20 meters further to a large barracks, 30 meters by 15. The women and girls had their hair shaved off in that barracks. They entered not knowing why they had been led there. The calm and silence lasted a moment longer. Later on, I saw that only a few minutes later, when they were given wooden stools and ordered to sit, and 8 Jewish barbers, robots, silent as the grave, approached them to shave their hair down to the scalp with clippers, the awareness of the whole truth hit them at that instant. Suddenly, without any transition between the hope and the ultimate despair, there were laments and shrieks. I stood off to the side in the yard, together with the group picked out to dig graves, watching my brothers, sisters, acquaintances, and friends being driven to their death. And just to emphasize what he's saying, this is actually a sign that that was hanging in Belzec, and it says, "Attention, all belongings to be handed in the shed, except money, documents, and other valuables, which you must keep with you. Shoes must be tied together in pairs and put in the marked area. Afterwards, you must go to the showers completely naked." The deception obviously was to limit panic and to get everybody going in as efficiently as possible. So, were there survivors? So again, it's hard to see. Again, there are 3 survivors that we know of that escaped the camp once it was a death camp. Right after the war, a few people had actually said that they were in Belzec and they escaped, and they know, but it was Belzec when it was a labor camp, not when it was a death camp. There are 2 women. Their names were Minna Astman and Malka Thielenfeld, and they were from Zholkiev, and they escaped and they got back to Zholkiev. They hid themselves in a train under bags full of the valuables, the things that were being shipped out. And they got back to Zholkiev and they told all about Belzec, but then they were rounded up once again and sent back to Belzec, and they were killed. So we don't have their testimony. We only have people who heard about, what they had said. So we don't have the details. And then there's a vague story about a dentist called Bachner from Krakow, who came to Belzec with the last transport from Krakow at the beginning of October 1942. And he said that he was able to hide himself in the latrines for a few days. And finally, he saw his opportunity, and he was able to leave the latrine pit and escape from the camp. We know about him because he got back to Krakow, and he's written about in, there's an account by a righteous among the nations who had a pharmacy in the Krakow ghetto. His name is Tadeusz Pankiewicz. And he writes in his book that he met this man who had escaped from Belzec. And he's a very reliable source. But again, we don't have this Bachner's testimony himself, because then he disappears. No one knows. Pankiewicz never spoke to him again. He never heard from him again. And no one knows what happened to him. So Tadeusz Pankiewicz is considered a very reliable witness, but it's not his experience. It's him telling about somebody else's experience. So the 2 survivors that we do have are Chaim Hirschman. So Chaim Hirschman's story is really heartbreaking. I mean, all of this is heartbreaking, but Chaim Hirschman was a 29-year-old metal worker, and he, in September 1942, he and his wife and their 6-month-old child, we don't even know if it was a boy or a girl, they were sent to a place called Zhalikov, and from there they were deported to Belzec. His wife and his child were murdered upon arrival, but he's selected to work. And he's basically part of the group that's dismantling the camp, okay? So he's actually there until May of 1943, and then he's actually put on a train to Sobibor. So anybody that was left, the final Jews that were doing the work of clearing up the camp, they were sent to Sobibor, and most of them were killed immediately upon arrival in Sobibor. But he actually jumps off the train, and he's able to join a partisan group, and he hides, and he's in the forests the whole time, and he's actually awarded an award called the Grunwald Cross for fighting with the Germans. and he's a hero. He gets remarried to a woman named Paula, and in March of 1946, he goes to the Jewish Historical Commission in Lublin to give his testimony about Belzec. And he tells some of what happened to him, and then they say to him, they're like overwhelmed. They tell him to come back the next day, and he'll tell them more. And he actually goes home, and he's murdered that night in his apartment in March of 1946 in Lublin. His wife, Paula, did try to continue to speak about what his experience was, but again, if it's not from the person themselves, it's less powerful. And then we come to Rudolf Reder. So Rudolf Reder, whose book I showed you, is really considered to be the only survivor. I mean, think about that. He's the only survivor. From 500, whole communities are wiped out. And there's one person who's lived to tell the tale. Okay, so Rudolf Reder lived in Lvov, and he's born in 1881. So he's had a whole life. He and his wife had 3 children, and his wife's name was Fega. He had 3 children named Frida, but she was called Zofia, Baruch, and he was called Bronislav, and Maria. And he's deported to Belzec in August of 1942, so still in the main killing time of Belzec. But he's selected for work in the Sonderkommando. Again, his family are killed upon arrival. In November of 1942, he's actually still working in Belzec, and he's selected to go to Lvov, of all places, on a prisoner detail to buy building materials. And it's a very weird story. Basically, these SS men, or there were Travnikis, who were put in charge of guarding the prisoners, were not really so interested in guarding the prisoners, and 2 of them went to go get a drink, and one of them was guarding him and another couple of people in the truck, and he just took the opportunity and he escaped. He ran out, and because he was from Lvov, he knew people, and he goes to he actually had a soap factory. He was a chemist, and he had a soap factory. That was what his business was before the war. And he goes and he knocks on the door of one of his employees, one of his former employees, and she hides him. And another woman who he knew before also helps them. Her name is Joanna Borkowska, and he survives. Lvov is liberated by the Red Army in 1944, and unfortunately, whatever, he's an older man by now. Whatever, he marries this woman that saves him, Johanna Borkowska, and they move to Krakow. And he starts to try to testify about what happened to him. He writes up his memoirs. His name was actually Reuven Reder, but he writes up his memoirs under the name Rudolf Reder. And again, he meets a lot of anti-Semitism, a lot of discrimination. He feels like it's not a safe place for him to be. And so he and his wife actually leave. They actually come here in 1950 to Israel, but I guess it wasn't such an easy place to live at the time, and maybe it wasn't so easy for her. She wasn't Jewish. And they leave and they move to Canada. They lived in Toronto for the rest of their life. And he changes his name to Roman Roback, and that's the name that's on his grave in Toronto. Very late in his life, he dies in 1977. So in 1965, he's gone blind, and finally he's actually given the opportunity. There's essentially no punishment of any of the guards of Belzec. It's a very hard thing to take in, but essentially there's no punishment. There's no trials. There's finally one trial, because why aren't there any trials? Because there's no witnesses, right? There's no one who can say, I saw him do this. So that's it. There's no punishment for any of the perpetrators. Until 1965, they put Josef Oberhauser, he's one of many, on trial, and Reder is invited to testify, but he can't see him, he can't really identify him. He does testify. Ultimately, Oberhauser is charged, but he receives, unfortunately, a very, very light sentence. I think it's like 4 to 6 years or something like that. And nobody else is charged with anything. And that's really the end of that for Belzec. So I'm going to read one more bit of Rudolf Retter's testimony. This is about his deportation. Patrols had been searching house by house, every nook and cranny for several days. People were driven by force from their homes, this is in Lvov, without being allowed to take even a shred of clothing, a slice of bread. Next, the Gestapo herded crowds of people together, and those who resisted got a bullet in the head. I was in my workshop, so I locked the door and didn't answer, even though I heard them finishing people off. The Gestapo broke the door down, found me in some hiding place, beat me over the head with a whip, and took me away. They packed us all into streetcars too tight for us to move or breathe, and took us to the Yanovska camp. It was already evening. They gathered us in a closed circle on a big meadow. There were 6,000 of us. We were ordered to sit down and forbidden to stand, to move, or to stretch out an arm or a leg. A spotlight played on us from a tower. It was bright as day. Surrounded by armed thugs, we sat crowded incredibly close, all together, young and old, women and children of various ages. Several accurate shots rang out. Someone had stood up. Maybe he had wanted to be shot. We sat that way all night. There was deadly silence. Neither the children nor the women cried. At 6 a.m, they ordered us to get up off the damp grass and form up in fours, and the long rows of the doomed marched to the Kleperov station. Gestapo and Ukrainians surrounded us in tight ranks. Not a single person could escape. They herded us onto the ramp at the station. A long freight train was already waiting just past the ramp. There were 50 cars. They began loading us. The doors of the freight cars had been slid open and Gestapo stood on both sides, 2 on each side with whips in their hands, beating everyone on the face and head on the way in. All the Gestapo were beating people. We all got welts on our faces and bumps on our heads. The women were sobbing and the children were crying, hugging to their mothers. There were women with babies at the breast among us. Driven by the Gestapo who kept beating people ruthlessly, we stumbled over each other. The entrance was high. People had to climb up, pushing each other aside. We were in a hurry ourselves. We wanted to get it over with. A Gestapo man with a machine gun sat on the roof of each wagon. The Gestapo were beating people and counting off 100 into each wagon. It all happened so fast that it took no longer than an hour to load several thousand people. They finally sealed the cars. Packed into a crowd of trembling people, we stood tight, practically one on top of another. It was stuffy and hot, and we were close to madness. Not a drop of water, not a crumb of bread. We rode on. No one said a word. We were aware that we were headed for death, that nothing could save us. So I have a candle here for Rudolf Retter's wife, Fega. And, Chama, would you like to come up? I don't know her full Hebrew name, but her name was Fega Retter, and the candle will burn for her, and hopefully it will give her some nachama. Just, her soul shall be bound up with the souls of all of Am Yisrael. Okay, so I want to introduce you to a few people who either were killed in Belzec or I'll just introduce you to the first one. Rav Yitzchak Menachem Nachum Torsky. He was the son of the Shpikover Rebbe, Reb Mordechai, and it's a branch of Skver. Right, the whole Torsky, Chernobyl, Rachman-Strivka. Actually, his mother was the daughter of the Rebbe of Rachman-Strivka. So, can you see his face? Can you see it? An amazing picture. There's actually a picture of him online on Wikipedia. There's a page about him in the Hebrew Wikipedia, and it's a much younger picture. And I had that at first on the screen, and then I went to the Yad Vashem website to find a candle, a label, to make a label for him, and they had this picture actually. So I thought, a very dignified picture. So he was a very interesting person. He was a person of a lot of deep thoughts and an earnest desire to live an authentic life. He grew up in, obviously, a Rebbe's household, and he was engaged to the daughter of the Belzec Rebbe, Rabbi Sachar Dov's daughter. She was called Sheva. Her name was Bat Sheva, and she was called Sheva. And they were engaged for 6 years. And in the time that they were engaged, he actually he wrote a letter to a Yiddish author by the name of Yaakov Dinazin. And this letter is really, it's quite heartbreaking. It's 27 pages long. And he's talking about how he's not sure if he actually wants to live this life, and how he is not sure how he feels about Hasidus. And then he corrects himself and he says, no, it's not Hasidus that I don't know how I feel about. It's the trappings of what this lifestyle looks like now. And he kind of like harkens back, and he says, when the Baal Shem Tov, when the Magid, when the great Hasidic masters, when they were teaching, they were really bringing light into the world. But now it feels to me, and again, he was like a teenager. He's writing this letter. He was 22 actually when he was writing it. And he says, it feels to me like all we're doing is wearing the clothes, and we're not actually like learning the Hasidus. When I was reading the letter, I read the whole letter. It's a very, very beautifully written. It's been translated, beautifully written. You really get the sense that he wanted some kind of change. He actually reminded me, I don't know if they knew each other, but it reminded me a little bit of the Piasetzner Rebbe and his sort of like railing against the education system and how it needs to be overhauled, it needs to be changed, and his writing reminded me of that. I have just a quote from him. This is at the end. This is really towards the end of the letter. He says, "Darkness surrounds me, but one spark glimmers in the darkness. I intend to fan the spark and ignite a great fire that will light my way in life. But possibly, before I am able to make it into a flame, it will flicker and die out completely, and I shall remain standing alone, solitary in the darkness. I fear that possibility, but find strength in the hope that it will not go out, that I will be able to make it into a great light, an illuminating light, I hope, for without hope, what worth is life?" And then he marries his bashert, and Baruch Hashem, she was actually his bashert. They actually had a beautiful marriage, bless you, whoever sneezed. And he moves to Belz in 1910. And part of his letter was that he wasn't so sure that he wanted to be the son-in-law of the Belzer Rebbe, but actually, they actually had a very nice relationship. In 1914, his father gets sick back in Shpikov, and he goes back to be with his father, and his father passes away in Pesach of that year. What's significant about 1914? What happens in 1914? World War I. Okay, so he gets stuck there. He's named the new Rebbe of Shpikov. He's a co-Rebbe with his brother-in-law, who actually comes from Rizhin, Rav Shalom Yosef Friedman of Bohush, and they're there the entire World War II, separated from his wife and kids, who were in Belz. And at some point during World War II, they also left Belz and they go into Hungary, and that was a safer place. Finally, at the end of the war, he goes back and meets back up with his family in Belz. Ultimately, they move back to Belz, and then he actually gets the job offer, we'll call it, to be a Rav in a place called Ravaruska. And that's what he takes on. And he actually said that he would rather be a Rav than a Rebbe. And he becomes the Rav of the town. And he's a very beloved Rav. And actually his father-in-law used to call him my Lamdan. The Belzer Rebbe called him my Lamdan. because he really he had an amazing head for learning. And even if you want to look him up on Wikipedia, I thought it was very interesting that at the end of this person that revealed this whole letter, he writes even at the end though that it was written by a 22-year-old, and ultimately he does grow into the life that he was born into, and really becomes a leader of Jewish communities, of Jews, a beloved leader. Okay, so David, would you like to light the candle? I don't have a book by him, so that's the candle that's sitting there with no book behind it. But for Rav Yitzchak Menachem Nachum ben Harav Mordechai, Nishmato Tzur B'Tzura Chaim. Okay, this is a fan favorite, Pro Banish. Okay, Pro Banish, so I'll just skip a couple of things here for 1 second and just show you this one. So Pro Banish is one of my personal heroes. One of my, I don't know, for those of you who know that I go on birthday trips to, is Nitza here? No, okay. Birthday trips to Kivrei Tzadikim and Tzadikot. And so last year, not this past year, but the year before, my birthday trip was to Pearl Banish's kever. She's buried on Har Menuchos, Pearl Banish and Rav Meir Shapiro. That was what we did. So I go back to her story. So she survived, okay, but her family doesn't. Her family is, most of her family is sent to Belzec. Her book is absolutely magnificent. If you haven't read it, you have to read it, To Vanquish the Dragon. She was a Beis Yaakov girl, and she personally was taught by Sarah Schneerer, and the book is just all about how these girls found light in darkness and brought light to darkness and tried to help as many Yidden as they could possibly help, and to also try to keep as many mitzvahs as they could, because that's what brought light, that's what brings light to the world. So she moves around. She's from Krakow. She grew up in Krakow, and then because of all the restrictions, she ends up they run to various smaller places, that are in the towns all around Krakow, like Bochnia, like Slumniki. She ends up basically just trying to stay out of the hands of the Germans. But when her family is in Slumniki, they get rounded up. And she is working somewhere else. She is not rounded up, and there's nothing she can do for them. She knows that they were rounded up. She even sees where they're being kept, and she tries to bribe someone to get them out, and she is unable to. Now, after they're gone, I just have a little quote from her, and then we'll read a bigger one. Actually, maybe I'll just get the book and read it from there. She writes, I decided to follow the transport. To do this, however, I had to find out where it had gone, and no one knew that. Okay, now, the reason I brought that is because she actually, I asked a bunch of people who knew her and who are like her Talmidot and know her story far better than I do. And I asked them, did she ever actually talk about Belzec? And they said no. They know she never, in her whole experience during the Shoah, she never knew where they had been sent, and for many years afterwards, she never knew where they had been sent because the name Belzec wasn't even known. So she actually goes to the Bochnia ghetto, and she seeks comfort with from a bracha from the Baba Rebbe. Okay, so she know her family are Baba, and she knows her brothers know the Rebbe. Excuse me, not Baba, the Belzer Rebbe, the son. Okay, Rabbi Aaron Rokeach, not the same Belzer Rebbe that was the father-in-law of Rav Tversky, but his son, Rav Aaron Rokeach, and he's in a little town near Bochnia, and she goes there. I have the words for you here. Okay. His pale face was a mask of anguish, imprinted with the agony of his beloved people. I was overwhelmed to the point of fear by this awesome face, and yet unable to turn away. I stood motionless, struck dumb by my feet riveted to the floor. The Belzer Rebbe's piety and his love for his fellow man were legendary. Thousands of Hasidim flocked to his court in Belz to bask in his presence, draw sustenance from his wisdom, and find uplift in his prayers. His every move was an inspiration to them. His appeal, moreover, went beyond his own Hasidim. People from far and wide visited him, seeking his counsel and blessing. Men and women in trouble thronged to the Rebbe to pour out their bitter hearts and obtain his blessings and help. "What brings you here, my child?" a soft voice tenderly questioning. My mouth suddenly opened and out poured all my pain, hurt, and anguish. The Rebbe cradled his face in his hands. He was silent. He did not interrupt me. My words flowed like a stream that had suddenly freed itself of a heavy dam. I heard myself saying, "Oh God, wasn't it better for you to have them here? My brothers studied your Torah in the cellar day and night, sanctifying your name. In the most dangerous situations, they kept your commandments, forsaking no detail. Oh God," I cried out in anguish, "how could you gain from shedding their blood? Would then the dust praise you? Who would then tell of your glory? Why have you forgotten us?" I cried, all my repressed emotions giving way. "Oh God, have compassion on your people. End their sufferings. Save them so that they may again proclaim your kingdom." The Rebbe had been silent and let my outpouring proceed uninterrupted. Now I stopped abruptly, frightened by the Rebbe's silence, looking at him, regretting my eruption. I expected to be rebuked for my unchecked torrent of words, but he continued to bury his face in his hands. Suddenly, from his caring, hurting heart came an awesome sigh. The sigh not of one man, but of millions of suffering human beings that pierced all worlds and the heavens, reaching the very throne of God. The silence that followed was even more frightening. I shivered. Again, I dared not open my mouth. I just stared at those shoulders, bent under the Jewish people's sufferings, and regretted having compounded his pain. Then the Rebbe lifted his head just an inch, just enough for me to glimpse his face. In his customarily concise way, he said only this: "Ze is shoin git." For them, it's good now. They are not suffering anymore. My head began to spin and my chest to throb with pain. What had the Rebbe said? What had he meant? I marshaled my strength and asked, "Rebbe, where should I look for them? Where should I turn? What can I do for them?" "Just go on, my child," he said, softly, lovingly. "May God bless and keep you," he continued, invoking the priestly blessing. "May he shine his countenance upon you. May he bless you with peace." My sobs choked me. I could not utter a sound. I left with tears streaming down my cheeks, tears of helplessness, tears of pain, and tears of awe, for I knew that I had seen true greatness. So I have a candle for Pearl's mother. Dvara, you like the candle for Pearl's? Oh, here, this is the book.
Here.
You can lift up the thing. Her name was Chaya Frida Bas Menachem Mendel. May her soul be connected to all the souls of Am Yisrael. And have an aliyah. Okay, the next person. Oh, I wanted to just show you one more thing. This is a book that actually Pearl Banish had one brother who survived. You probably can't see it here. Anyway, it was a common practice afterwards for anybody that wrote Svarim to include. So he has all the names of their family in the Lezecher Olam. Okay, the Belzec Rebbe. Many of you know the book Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust. Right? Mostly these are stories of the Belzec Rebbe and his second wife, Bronya. The Belzec Rebbe's first wife was sent to Belzec and she was murdered there. The Belzec Rebbe was the great-grandson of the Bnei Yissaschar, and he was married to Perel Unger. That was her name. She was the daughter of Shalom David Unger, the Zashavna Rebbe, and he lived in Zhezhov. So he describes his journey from Lvov, and he says basically the story is that they get to Belzec, and his wife screams out, "He's 45 years old!" And he doesn't know what she's talking about, but obviously she saw right away that they were dividing people into who can work and who couldn't work. And he screams out, I'm 56 years old. And she shouts again, he's 45 years old, you're 45 years old. And the SS takes him to the other side, even though he's really 56 years old and he probably didn't look like he could work, but Hashem saved him. The SS take him to the side and they say, "You'll join her later, I assure you," not meaning anything good by that. Sometime later, the rabbi was taken back to the railway station. Near the platform, there were stacks of valises stamped with home addresses, neatly folded clothing, heaps of hair and gold teeth, jewels and gold coins, all that remained of the Lvov transport. Many new transports had since arrived at the Belzec station from Galicia and from all over Europe. "You, tall dog, come over here," the SS officer snapped as the Rabbi of Bluzhov at the Rabbi of Bluzhov in his steely, cold voice. "You and 2 other dogs will accompany the clothing to Lvov. The Third Reich is in need of clothing. You Jewish warmongers caused World War II. Because of you, our women and children suffer from the bitter winter cold. Because of you, we had to convert civilian shops into munition factories." A blow over the rabbi's head signaled the conclusion of the speech. Dressed in a strange uniform, his head shaved, the lone survivor of his family, the rabbi made his way back to Lvov atop bundles of clothes belonging to the dead Jews of that town where he had once been a rabbi with a large Hasidic following. The trucks arrived in Lvov's Yanovska Road concentration camp at midnight. Shivering from cold, exhausted, starving, trying to comprehend the nightmarish days at the Belzec Inferno, the rabbi searched for shelter in the shadows of the trucks. At dusk, the figure of a young man appeared. He was selling coffee from a soup pot. "A sip of coffee for 20 pfennig, a sip of coffee for 20 pfennig," he was calling in a subdued voice. The rabbi walked over to the coffee vendor. "Young man, I'm going to ask you a favor. Please give me a sip of coffee. It is a few days since a morsel of food or a drop to drink has passed my lips. I can't pay you. I have no money." The coffee vendor examined the emaciated face of the man in the striped uniform and gave him a ladle full of coffee. With one hand, the rabbi held the ladle of coffee, while with the other he covered his head and recited the appropriate bracha. Upon hearing the bracha, the vendor burst into tears. "Woe unto me! Whatever happened to us? To what debased state have we fallen that a person no longer recognizes his own rabbi? I am young Landau, the brother of Mayor Landau, your own chassid." The rabbi comforted him. "There is no need to cry, my young friend. As long as one recognizes the voice of Yaakov, the hands of Esav will have no power over us." There are only a handful of survivors of Belzec. The Rebbe of Bluzhov is one of them. So I have a candle for the Rebbe's wife, Pearl Bas Shalom David. Dvara, can you come light? Thank you. May Pearl Bas Shalom David's neshama have an aliyah, the one that has no book in front of it, yeah. Yeah, the Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust. Thank you. Okay, so this is Sam Halpern and his brother Aryeh. So again, I grew up knowing them. They were Chort Cover Hasidim. They were from a town called Charostkov near Tarnopol. And he actually tells a story about how first of all, he met the Chortkova Rebbe. His father took him when he was 8. And also he had his tonsils out, or he had to have his tonsils out. And before he had the operation, his mother took him to the Husyatina Rebbe for a bracha, so he remembered that. And they lived in Chortkov. Their town, Chorostkov, was right near Chortkov, and it went over to the Soviet side right at the beginning of the war. So he has this whole story about how they had a business, and anybody that had a business were then considered, enemies of the Soviet Union. So first they lost their business, and they had to deal with all the stuff from the Soviets. And also he was supposed to join. There was a whole competition of who could run fast and would get a position in the Red Army. And by the time they were recruiting him to the Red Army, actually the Germans invaded. So he gets caught by the Germans, and he ends up. He and his brother Aryeh end up in a slave labor camp called Kamyanka, and it's a horrific place. Most of his book. This is his book, Darkness and Hope. Most of the book is about his experiences in Kamyanka and how terrible it was. And by the end, they're in the essentially a death march from Kamyanka. He and his brother both escape separately from each other, and they both make their way, again, separately from each other, to a non-Jewish family that their family were friends with. And they're saved by this family, the Gorniak family. And actually the mother, Tatiana Gorniak, she said, well, when Sam gets there, the son, Jan, is standing outside, and he says to him, "Where's your brother?" And he says, I don't know where my brother is. And he basically expected to stay there for an overnight just to get something to eat. Maybe they would be nice to him. They end up staying there for 9 months, I believe. And when Jan sends him into the barn, and he basically climbs up into the hayloft. And when he gets up there, there's another person there, and it's his brother Aryeh. And in the morning, they wake up and they see the mother Tatiana. And she says to them that their mother came to her in a dream the night before they escaped and asked her to please watch over my sons. And this Gorniak family did indeed watch over them and saved their lives. Okay, so I want to actually first read what Sam writes about his father. So he doesn't have a picture. He doesn't have a picture of his parents. His father's name was Mordechai Dov, and this is his father's father, Shmuel Yitzchak, and this is his mother's father. So I just wanted to show you their beautiful beards, because he actually comments on it. He says, "Every day new decrees were issued against us. All Jewish men were ordered to shave off their beards. Everybody complied immediately, with the exception of Yeshaya Rappaport, the rabbi of Chorostkov, and my father of blessed memory. My father tried to stay at home, but when he had to go out, he would wrap his jaw in a kerchief which covered his beard, as if he had a toothache. With his beard still intact, he was taken to Belzec. My father's death was the first tragic loss for our family. When I found out the terrible way in which my father lost his life, I could not eat nor sleep. I cried constantly. Even though death was all around me, I still could not accept this loss. My father, such a gentle and giving man, was only 54 years old. He had written to me in camp to keep up my morale. I would work all day on the road thinking of him and crying." Now, Sam felt very responsible for sharing the story of what he didn't know anything about Belzec, but he knew ultimately that his father and his whole community were taken there. So I'll read what he writes first. "My father was one of those, again, 600,000, we don't know exactly the number. My uncles, aunts, and cousins were also among the murdered. Our entire section of eastern Galicia, with many towns and cities like Chortkov, Chorostkov, Tarnopol, Lvov, and Zholkiev, was made Judenrein, with Belzec serving as the Jews' final destination. Since there is no actual grave over which to pray in Belzec, when I visit, I say Kaddish near a memorial on the site. The statue of a skeletal figure supporting another, which bears the Polish inscription, in memory of the victims of Hitler's terror murdered from 1942 to 1943. So that's what this is. Okay, so I connected Sam to the pictures of the memorial because basically there was no memorial in Belzec. The camp was destroyed and then nothing was there for many, many years until the 60s. And in fact, there were many grave robbers and people who did all kinds of, tried to take things from there, and very not good. Also used as like a trash heap and a shortcut through all kinds of things. And there were mass graves there, like people were walking on these mass graves to get somewhere else. And ultimately, he was one of the people, he went in 1995 or 96, and he was one of the people that got very, very involved in that the site should be properly kept up. There should be a proper memorial there. You can see this sign. It says, "This is where a monument of commemoration of the slaughter of Jewish children who died between 1939 and 1945 in Poland will be built of contribution people of goodwill." It's like a bizarre thing, but that's what the old memorial looked like. It was one communist thing. It doesn't say Jews on it, okay? And these were like symbolic urns that had nothing in them, and that's what was on the site. So this is the director of the museum, Eva. She's actually quite like a righteous among the nations. You can't really see these pictures. Can we turn off all the lights for 1 second just to see the pictures a bit better? Because this part's kind of important about the pictures. There we go. Okay. So the old site over there was just empty. Okay, and this is the new memorial. I have better pictures. Okay, this is the new memorial. You basically, it is commemorated as one big mass grave, okay? And that's what it's meant to be, that no one can walk on this whole area. You walk down a ramp that cuts through it, and they tried to dig the ramp in between where the mass graves were. And there are mass graves under here and under there. And the whole idea is that it's covered over. No one should walk on it. It's a bit more respectful, okay? And there's obviously a lot of artistic symbolism. You're kind of walking down into this like valley of death, okay? I actually took this picture. I was there with the group. And at the end, there's this wall that has the pasuk from Eov, Eretz al tchasi damai, right? Earth, do not cover my blood, ve'al yehi makom lezakati, and let there be no resting place for my outcry. And facing that quote is a wall of names, first names of Jews. Presumably, I mean, again, we have about 35,000 to 50,000 names out of 500,000. But these were pretty common first names. So when you stand down there in the bottom, you're kind of like surrounded by the quote and the names. They're like back to back. And then when you get out, you walk down surrounding the whole thing. On the steps here, you can see these words. It's different communities. So for example, the entire Jewish community of Zamość was sent to Belzec. And so there's I don't know if you can see it over here, but there's Zamość and the date of the deportation. So going around the whole thing are the names of all the communities who were sent to Belzec, who were murdered in Belzec. And some of them are repeated because there were several deportations from there. So the last person that I want to just talk about very quickly is Yosef Lefkowitz. Yeah, Gabs. Okay, can I have the lights back on again? Sorry, thanks. So Yosef, again, a fan favorite, okay? He wrote a book that you can get. It's called The Survivor, okay? That's what it looks like. I have his old book over here. But Yosef was born in a place called Jalishitz in 1926, okay? So he was 13 when the war started. And he is just incredible. He passed away in December of 2024, just now. Okay, December 2024. And he just was an amazing person. He survived a bunch of different camps, 6 different camps, including Auschwitz, Plaszow, and Mauthausen. And ultimately, after the war, he becomes a Nazi hunter. He was like this tall. And he caught Amon Gut, who was like 7 feet tall. And I mean, to watch him tell this story was just a crazy thing. He also rescued 600 Jewish children from monasteries and orphanages and he actually helped coordinate their move to Eretz Yisrael. So those 600 Jewish children became part of Am Yisrael again. Ultimately, he emigrates to South America. He lives there for a while, and then he lives in Montreal. Millers? Yeah. And Nova Sellers, okay. So he lived in Montreal, and then finally he lived here in Yerushalayim. And that's where we met him, right? Actually, I met him in Poland, but you met him in Jerusalem. Did anybody else here know him? Oh, a few people. Okay, beautiful. So, so we'll close with his words. He says, "I am no hero." This is from the prologue of his book. Sorry if you can't read along with me. "I am no hero. I'm afraid I'm about to collapse. I sigh deeply and sag forward as if I have been punched in the stomach. I weep when I thought I had no more tears to shed. My heart is breaking. It has taken me nearly 80 years to summon the courage to come to this accursed place, where a field of crushed boulders and small stones, black, gray, and tainted by death, acts as a grave marker. It is raining gently. An icy wind blows from the east. The perimeter of the site, no bigger than 3 football pitches, contains human ashes and pulverized bone mixed with sand. Some 600,000 Jews met their end here between March and December 1942. Belzec's extermination camp. The very name terrified me. My mother, Shendel, and my 3 younger brothers, Meir Wolf, Herschel Tzvi, and David Leib, were sent there by a random flick of an SS officer's whip. Like around 15,000 others, transported from our shtetl, our home village of Dzialoshice in southeast Poland, they never came out. I vowed I would never visit, but their souls called out to me. They are among millions who have no cemetery, no tombstone, no record of their existence beyond personal memory. On that bleak late winter's day, when the rain melted the last of the snow, I found strength in a sacred duty. The children of the deceased have an obligation to say Kaddish, a cornerstone of Judaism. It is an act of hope that allows mourners to praise God, acknowledge their grief, and to reinforce their belief that they will see their loved ones again. I lit candles in remembrance of a beautiful, kind woman and 3 sweet boys, cupping them to protect the flames before placing them in glass jars. I honored my extended family of 150 individuals, all consumed by the Holocaust. As the sole survivor, it was my responsibility to bear witness, to give voice to the voiceless, the unspoken, and the unknown. I sensed their spirit, their neshama. I closed my eyes tightly, bowed my head, and recited, "May God's great name be praised throughout all eternity, glorified and celebrated, lauded and praised, acclaimed and honored, extolled and exalted, ever be the name of thy Holy One, far beyond all song and psalm, beyond all hymns of glory which mortals can offer, and let us say, Amen." That's him standing next to the Dzialoshice name on the walkway around Belzec. And then, this is a special treat. I don't know if you'll be able to hear this. I forgot to ask Yuri about the sound, but I'll try and make it as loud as possible and hold the microphone to the side. This is us in Auschwitz-Birkenau, and that's all he wanted to do. It was Friday. We were in Auschwitz-Birkenau. See how small he is? Okay. Can someone, Eitan, you can come up and light a candle for Yosef Lefkowitz's brother, David Leib. David Leib ben Simcha. May his soul be caught up in the souls of Am Yisrael and Hallelujah. And just the very last thing I want to show you is that there was one last building that was used in Belzec. The old railway station. This is a painting by that same Polish guy. Okay, and after the war, it actually was still standing at the end of the war, but then after the war, it got destroyed. So it was used for sorting the victims' clothing and belongings. And I just want to show you that, what happens on a trip to Poland, in case you haven't been on one. This is what we do. We turn places of darkness into places of light. And we daven. So I want to give us all a bracha that it's a big responsibility that we have to be living in the generations after the Holocaust. And may we be blessed, first of all, with more light. And second of all, may we be strengthened by the strength of Am Yisrael that is all around us, of the Kedoshim and their families who died through Mesiras Nefesh, who died with their belief fully intact, who died with Shema Yisrael on their lips. And that's who we are. That's where we come from. And may we be strengthened by that to bring more and more light into the world. Bezrat Hashem.